Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock, so welcome to the Municipality of the County of Kings Planning Advisory Committee for Tuesday, December the 13th of 2022. My name is Trish Javerick. I will briefly chair this meeting, only until we complete our requirement to elect a chair. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order, and we'll start with roll call. Looking around the table, I think we do have quorum, but we do have quorum, and we do have regrets from 3 members of our committee. So citizen member Logan Morris sent his regrets, Chantal Gagnon, and Councillor Jim Granger. So with that, we'll move along to item number 3 of the agenda, which is the election of chair. As per our policy, every December, we are required to elect a chair and vice chair to this committee. So with that, I'll open up the floor for nominations for chair. I think the first hand I saw was Peter Allen.
I'd like to nominate Martha Armstrong for chair.
I would second that. That was going to be my nomination as well.
Mine too.
Okay, well that makes it easy. Do you
You're in.
Do you accept, Ms. Armstrong?
Sure.
Thank you. I guess formally we need to vote on that. All in favor? Pass unanimously. Thank you, and welcome back. With that, I'll hand the agenda over to our newly re-elected chair, Martha Armstrong.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate the support. So we have an agenda before us. Are there any amendments to that agenda? Oh, sorry, yes, we have to elect a vice chair. Sorry. So are there nominations for the position of vice chair? Councillor Allen.
I nominate Jim Windsor.
Okay. Second? Thank you. Do you accept the nomination?
Okay.
I'm okay.
Just remember we're on video as well, so we should use the mic.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to, we are on the mics and we are on video, so I'm going to turn your light on and you can make that nomination. Councillor Allen?
I'd like to nominate Jim Windsor for vice chair.
Thank you. And we have a second with Councillor Killam? Thank you. And you accept Councillor Windsor?
I do, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for deputy or vice chair? If not, I'll ask you to register your vote. Are we voting?
Just show him.
Oh, we're doing show of hands. Okay. So a show of hands, please. Congratulations, Councillor Windsor. Okay. So now down to the business at hand. Are there any amendments to the agenda? None? Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as submitted? Ms. Friars, thank you. Councillor Allen, thank you. All those in favor? Okay, we got to get this voting set up. Some days we're on, some days we're off. Okay.
So it was just the election that wasn't.
Oh, okay.
Now they're all set up.
Oh, okay, so now we're voting. Okay. We will do that next. Approval of the agenda has been passed, and it's at this time that we call for any disclosure of conflict of interest issues with the items that we have on our agenda. Are there any conflict of interest issues? No? Good. You also have before you the minutes of our November 8th, 2022 minutes. Hopefully you've had a chance to review. If there are no errors or omissions, can I have a motion to approve, please? Councillor Allen, thank you. Councillor Killam, thank you. No debate? All those in favor, and we will vote on our voting system. So you can register your vote now, please. Oh, it's gone again. There we go. And that was unanimous. Thank you. And was there any business arising from those minutes? No? Good. First order of business today is an application to rezone portions of the property on Hiltz Road, and that file belongs to Mr. Fredericks, and I will pass it over to you.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. This is a planning application that we've received from Roadnizer Salvage. They've submitted a request to rezone portions of a couple of properties on Hiltz Road, which is in the community of Garland on the North Mountain. They're looking to rezone from the A2 or rural mixed use zone to the rural industrial M3 zone to permit their existing scrap and salvage operation. So Roadnizer Salvage has been operating here for decades. It's kind of a generational business at this point. It was started by the applicant's father, Eric Roadnizer, and is now operated by Eric's children, or two of his children, Kevin and Darren. And so Kevin Roadnizer has applied for the rezoning and has also applied for a provincial approval, which would be a set of regulations specific to the operation here to legitimize the commercial salvage facility. Now, this is a legal non-conforming use. Again, because it's so old, it's been here for so long, it predates municipal land use regulations. And the applicants are looking to ensure that everything is as sorted as it can be. The zoning, however, is a required first step for the provincial approval process. So for the province to initiate their commercial salvage facility regulations, they need to have confirmation from the municipality that it's in an appropriate industrial zone. So first we do this land use rezoning process, and the province is waiting for us to have that complete before they can carry out the Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change regulation process from their perspective. So it's a salvage and scrap operation. That's a defined term in our land use bylaw, and it is permitted under an industrial zone, under the rural industrial zone, and it's legally non-conforming, although some of the activity has expanded onto properties, perhaps over the last couple of decades. So the request is to rezone the land from the A2 zone, or that rural mixed use zone, to the rural industrial zone. The operation itself does span across a few properties, and the rural industrial zoning would only be applied to portions of 4 properties. The operation kind of spans across at least 5 properties, but in an effort to constrict or confine the operation down to a smaller footprint, the rezoning process is only applying to 4 of those properties. So we're located on the North Mountain, just off of Highway 360. This is sort of north of Berwick, north of Somerset. Hiltz Road goes across from Highway 360. And it's kind of a unique road. It's, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, but it doesn't have a lot of homes or businesses on it. It's an I-class road, according to the province. So the properties that we're looking at here are fairly large rural properties. Again, the business owns approximately 5 properties totaling around at least over 100 acres in size, but we're only talking about portions of those properties. So we're not talking about 100 acres, we're talking about 16 acres in total to rezone. So the properties range in their kind of their use. One large property at the very back is kind of a holding area. The properties closer to Highway 360 include an office, which is shown here, a dwelling, a primary dwelling here. Across the street is this operation. It's a fenced area, and this is where most of the kind of deconstruction or dismantling occurs. There's a garage building here where where vehicles and other equipment come in, they dismantle it into its individual components, be it stainless steel or other metals or other plastics, and those plastics and metals and things get sorted. And those sorted piles are kind of what can make these sorts of uses be a little bit unattractive, if you will. There can sometimes be piles of plastics or metals, and sometimes that can be could be undesirable from a rural residential perspective. So there are some requirements in terms of keeping these separated and buffered. And this site is fairly well separated from rural residential uses, of which there are some along Highway 360, and fairly well buffered. Certainly there's a lot of woodland in this area, and those wooded areas offer quite a good separation and buffering. So this gives us a sense of the properties we're talking about. This is Highway 360, so if you come north from Berwick and then turn right onto Hiltz Road, you'd see the main operation. So the office is on this property here, that garage building, that fenced area is on this property, and it's fairly well contained. Some of the use is expanded onto this eastern property here, but that is outside of the rezoning process. So what we're looking to do is limit the operation off of this property and contain it on these two. And this large one back here, we would again only be seeking a rezoning of a small portion of that property. And Hiltz Road, you can see here, while the Roadenizer salvage properties do front onto Hiltz Road, very few, if any, other business or home fronts onto Hiltz Road. It's an I-class road. I'm not entirely sure what that classification means, but it's a fairly low priority road from the province's perspective. And it provides access to wood lots and a few agricultural fields, but primarily it's a forested area. There are some agricultural activities that are along Hiltz Road, but no homes and businesses front on Hiltz other than the Roadenizer salvage operation. So the zoning on the North Mountain is mostly rural mixed use, and it does have some A1 zone land. You can see just to the west, there is some A1 zoning. And so that zoning is certainly very, very protective and wouldn't be eligible for this type of rezoning, but all the subject properties owned by Roadenizer Salvage are located in the A2 zone. And the A2 zone does allow for council to consider rezoning applications specifically to the rural industrial zone. So the rural industrial zone, what's the purpose of this zone? And we looked at the planning strategy for this. Largely it's to provide and accommodate an opportunity for rural industrial uses, which often require a lot of land and for their operations, but also large buffering and separation. And these characteristics are easily found in rural areas, but sometimes can be difficult to achieve in more urban areas, like industrial parks or certainly within growth centers. So agricultural, forestry, fishing, and other kind of industries require large tracts of land. They need to be well separated from residential uses. So this zone is intended to accommodate that type of use in a rural area, and it does provide some buffering and separation requirements within the zone standards for this type of use. And so, the rural areas, they include agriculture and forestry and fishing, and all of those sorts of industries may at times require a salvage type facility or salvage business, as they have older vehicles or older equipment that may have served its purpose and needs to be recycled. And so this type of facility is important both for a kind of regional perspective, but also specifically with rural industries like forestry, fishing, and agriculture. So there's another policy within the planning strategy that allows council to consider proposals to rezone land from the agricultural A2, except land in the A1 zone. So this policy allows council to consider proposals to rezone land within the agricultural designation, which we're within, except for lands within the A1 zone. So if you're in the A1 zone, you cannot apply for this type of rezoning, but because these properties are in the A2 zone, it is possible to enable this type of rezoning. So when considering these types of rezonings, council looks to see that the proposal will not negatively impact nearby agricultural operations, And in this case, we haven't heard from any of the landowners. It's much of the agricultural land is owned by the Lambs, and we didn't hear from them through the consultation phase. The conversations I've had with the applicants anyway, they have a fairly good relationship, working relationship with the Lambs, and there hasn't been a pattern of conflict there. We also look to see that the proposal won't contribute to undue conflict with rural residential uses. And certainly there could be some conflict with rural residents, but it hasn't been a major problem according to the to staff and the applicants. Obviously rural residents may be impacted to some degree, but because it's a long-standing use, those impacts are probably felt already, and it's fairly well separated. So we also look to see that the zone boundary itself is limited to the size that's reasonably required to accommodate the proposal. And so that's why we talked about constricting the zone boundary down a little bit rather than applying it across all of the properties. And this approval, both the zoning approval and the subsequent provincial regulations, help to minimize these impacts on the rural residents. So though both these approvals will help establish this commercial salvage facility with additional protections for rural residential homes and businesses. And the criteria also look to see that the additional rezoning criteria are met, and those are highlighted here. This is a familiar issue for Planning Advisory Committee and Council over the past year or two. We've gone through a municipal planning strategy amendment to reflect some issues that we found here. The back property on Road Nazar Salvage was recognized on the land cover map as being in agriculture when it's always been a sort of salvage holding yard. So this additional criteria requires the council consider the following: that the application to rezone this land applies to land not in recent agricultural production. And none of the land that we're talking about has been in recent agricultural production, but a misclassification was causing an issue here with the land cover map. So these criteria are slightly revised or edited to identify the land cover map as one tool, but we also look at aerial photography, assessment information, and local knowledge, and any other sources that have become available. So that allows us to kind of consider other sources, and that resulted in verification that these properties were not used for agriculture. These criteria to go on to sort of clarify that the proposal would not rezone more land than required for the specific proposal. And again, that goes back to that kind of zone boundary, the placement of that zone boundary, and not applying it in a blanket way. And again, not create undue conflict with nearby agricultural uses or rural residents. And again, we understand that there may be some conflict, but none is known, at least from the agricultural issue. And rural residents, we did hear from some folks with concerns about the operation, but because it's an existing use and it's fairly well separated, the zone boundary will shrink its footprint, and the provincial approval will introduce additional regulations that those concerns may very well be fully addressed through the approval process. And with every rezoning, we also consider the kind of general amendment criteria to see that it's in keeping with the planning strategy, and staff feel like it is. There's certainly policy and goals and objectives to support rural businesses and rural industries within our rural areas. There's no financial impact on the municipality. Services are certainly feasible because it's been there. We know that. They have wells and septic systems there already. Potential for land use conflict, again, is certainly present, as it usually would be with industrial uses, but staff are confident that the approval process will help reduce that conflict and minimize it. Impact on well fields is a complicated one in this sense. There are no designated well fields in this area, but obviously a salvage yard may pose some threat to groundwater itself. So there aren't any designated well field protection areas in the area. But we do recognize that there's potential risk for water contamination, which is both addressed through the municipal setback requirements of 50 feet from any water course, and will also be addressed in the provincial approvals. And site suitability, because it's an existing use, we're fairly confident that the site's suitable for the use. There's a few more criteria here that are reviewed in more detail in the report. And just a review, a reminder of these properties. We're talking about 4 properties. These are those property boundaries themselves, shown in red, and the area of kind of dark gray represents the area that we're talking about rezoning. So over 100 acres of ownership, but looking at about 16 acres of industrial zoning to accommodate the use, but also shrink the footprint and minimize potential impact. So that's the extent of the map. The process to date, we did hold a public information meeting. This was a couple of years ago now because we had this planning strategy amendment. Councillor Killam and myself recorded that session. And we did hear from some folks in the community of Garland. There were certainly some concerns about the operation expanding, but that is not the intent here. Certainly some hesitations around water contamination and litter kind of blowing around. And again, these issues should be partly addressed, at least through the land use bylaw requirements, and further regulations that would be imposed by the provincial approval would help address those as well. We're at the Planning Advisory Committee stage, and if forwarded on, it would go to Council for first reading in January. So this would be a potential motion, and staff believe the rezoning is suitable for the area, and since the use has existed here for many years without significant conflict, the lands also provide reasonable separation and buffering that are consistent with the zone requirements, and so staff are offering a positive recommendation, and I would pass it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of clarification? We do have one. Councillor Killam.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my concern centered around the impact it may have on domestic wells. As you know, everybody's on their own well systems. And I'm wondering if there was any provision made that would allow or have ongoing monitoring on maybe domestic wells that are close to the use. Just a question. I know that there are probably provincial regulations that do handle a bit of this, but I was concerned about the water table there. The geology there is very is such that things do run down into the earth quite easily, and that was just a concern. I was wondering about ongoing monitoring of any domestic wells that might be of concern.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that's a concern that I think the residents certainly expressed, and staff can appreciate that concern. The municipality isn't involved directly in any kind of monitoring, although that may be an aspect of the provincial approval. I don't think that they always would initiate a regular approval or regular monitoring of multiple wells, but there may be some water testing associated with the provincial approval. And because wells and septics are the jurisdiction of the province, we unfortunately have to rely on their expertise and their approvals to monitor that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, and I remember back in time too when we were talking about this, but on page 8, Madam Chair, through you, to Mark, we talk about amendments that were approved by the Planning Advisory Committee in January 22 and subsequently considered by Council in February 22 as well, same year. So what's the relationship between what we're doing here now and that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Through you, Madam Chair. If I could back up a slide or two, I could show the language of this this specific criteria is what changed. So this allows council to consider rezoning from the agricultural or A2, or this should say rural mixed use, from A2 to the rural industrial M3 zone, or the rural commercial C4 zone. So this is a criteria that applies when we're rezoning from the A2 zone to rural industrial or rural commercial. And what this used to say is that the application applies only to land that has not been in recent agricultural production as determined by Schedule F land cover map. So this one only pointed us towards the land cover map,
Right.
which we learned had some inconsistencies. So what we added was the ability for staff to review other sources of information. Be
Right.
it
So
aerial
this paved the
photography.
way for this amendment, this particular amendment to be,
Yeah.
this here paved the way for this specific amendment now to occur, the rezoning.
Not sort of. I mean, it was required, I think, because the land cover map we discovered was not 100% accurate.
Right.
So we had to correct that language in this criteria before we were able to confidently give it a positive recommendation.
Right, and second, and I don't, trying to draw my, my mind between this amendment, which now is from A2 to MP3, and the one we just dealt with on Wolfville Ridge. Now, I know there's been an existing business here that will continue in the same track, but we've made a business change on Wolfville Ridge. Is there anything particular that Mark or management would want to add in terms of the similarities or the dissimilarities between those amendments?
Okay. Ms. Mosier?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Windsor. So the main similarity is that it's using this same, well, it's not this policy, it's the one in 2.2. Mark, would you mind going to that? Or no, it is that policy. My apologies.
It's this one that then points to the additional.
Right,
These
so
are
it
the
was
original
this policy
supplementary.
that was amended. So it was under this policy, both of those applications were assessed. So that's the
Okay.
similarity.
That's the similarity. Thank you. Thank you,
done?
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Friars?
I think probably along the same lines as Councillor Killam's question around wells and monitoring, I guess, given its historical context, is there any concern about contaminated soils and the residue that can, I guess, emanate from this type of business, and that migrating to potential agricultural areas or growing fields per se? And I guess I don't know if it's in municipal policy or whether it falls to the provincial regulations, but I guess at some point, do we have some certainty that those issues would be addressed? Because it can be extremely extensive and expensive to remediate, so.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think we appreciate that there's a risk there, and I think we share those same hesitations. We're not aware of any kind of immediate issue in that community, but certainly, piles of stuff, certainly could contribute. Most of the time, though, these piles are fairly clean and fairly well sorted. And relatively benign, I would expect, in that they're not dumping, used motor oil out back anymore. That's not the practice today. So in that sense, it's fairly clean and well sorted metals and clean and well sorted plastics. But certainly, there's still, I think, that possibility. But I think, within the scope of the municipal regulations. We're hoping that the provincial government introduces those sorts of regulations. That's our hope, and because those sort of monitoring aspects, the kind of contamination, the well water, groundwater resources, are largely under the jurisdiction of the province, and so it's our expectation that the commercial vehicle salvage facility regulations that get approved for this site would address those. And we've spoken with the province about that and what those plans usually look like. They couldn't verify absolutely what requirements would apply to this site, but we talked generally about what do they usually address, and those are certainly some of the topics that they typically address spill, contamination, and contingency plans for if a leak occurs, those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? If the committee doesn't mind, I do have one. Is this a salvage yard at this particular point regulated by the Provincial Department of Environment and Climate Change?
No, it's not.
It's not. So it's been operating all this time without that.
That's right.
So even though we make this change, there's no guarantee that they will get the approval that they need from the province.
I think it's quite likely that they will get the approval from the province, at least in a kind of high-level kind of regulatory phase, whether there may be steps required to gain compliance with those regulations. But yeah, the province will only initiate that review or that approval kind of process after the rezoning or after the zoning is in place. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation. The province very much wants to regulate this. We were in regular contact over the last couple of years, and they're just waiting for the zoning to be in place before they can make their next steps.
Okay, great, thank you. So if there's no further questions, the motion before us, this is a Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the rezoning of lands on Hilts Road in Garland from the rural mixed use A2 zone to the rural industrial M3 zone, as shown in Appendix A of the report dated December 13, 2022. Do I have a mover? Oh. We'll get the motion on the floor first, okay, Councillor Killam? Councillor Windsor, Councillor Allen seconds. Debate, go ahead, Councillor Killam.
I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Is there any debate? No. I'll call the question. All those in favor, please register your vote. Oh, okay. Sorry.
I just wanted to mention that I'll support it moving forward to a public hearing to hear what the community has to say.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
your vote would register yes,
Yes.
will it?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll take that as a yes. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Hmm? Oh, okay. So Ms. Fryer's vote did not register either, and she is a yes. So, thank you very much. Next order of business before us is an application to rezone the property at 1070 Central Avenue in Greenwood, and that file belongs to Katie Ullman, and your mic is open.
Yeah, 5 months. It's Greenwood Recycling. Mark's just going to move the file for me into the other drive.
We're just going to take a short pause here for some technical changes.
Okay, so we have a land use bylaw map amendment for 1070 Central Avenue in Greenwood, Nova Scotia, which is the location of Greenwood Recycling. Alicia Wack, on behalf of the Greenwood Recycling Inc., has submitted a land use bylaw map amendment to rezone from the mixed commercial C3 zone, the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone, and the residential mixed density R3 zone to the general commercial C1 zone. The proposal would permit a storefront recycling use, which was the existing use of this property. Through the adoption of the 2050 plan, the zoning recently changed from the general commercial C1 zone to the mixed commercial C3 zone, making the existing use non-conforming. And in order for Greenwood Recycling to get their provincial licensing to operate their business, they must conform with the land use bylaw to renew their provincial permits. So this is the general location at 1070 Central Avenue in Greenwood. It is located directly across from the mall area. This is an overview of the site. So it's located within the Greenwood Growth Center, and it is located across the mall, the road from the Greenwood Mall. The subject property has a lot area of approximately 37,807 square feet, or 0.86 acres. There is 163 feet of road frontage, and the public access to the storefront recycling use is off Central Avenue, while the loading access is off of Rock Notch Road. The existing building is located towards the rear of the property, with parking being located between Central Avenue and the building. The developed area of the property is relatively flat, and the undeveloped area at the back of the property is a wooded area that has got the topography is not very flat, so the property owners don't believe they'll be able to do anything with that section of land in the future. A site visit was conducted on October 13th, 2022, and no issues were noted. So this is the future land use map. As you can see, the property is designated both residential designation and commercial designation. And this is the zoning map. There are currently multiple zones applied to this property, including the commercial residential C3 zone, which is this darker green, the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone, which is this back portion of the property, and then the residential mixed density R3 zone, which is located on the eastern portion of the property. The site is the location of the Greenwood Recycling, and the existing storefront use, recycling use is not permitted in the mixed commercial residential zone, thereby requiring a rezoning to the general commercial zone to be compliant. The application concerns the proposed rezoning of land from the current mixed commercial residential C3 zone, the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone, and the residential mixed density R3 zone to the general commercial zone. The policies contained within the municipal planning strategy enable council to consider this application. The enabling municipal planning strategy policies 5.3.3, council shall consider amendments to any of the zoning maps in the land use bylaw provided the application is for a specific development and is to rezone land to another zone enabled within the same designation unless the zone change is specifically prohibited within this strategy. The subject property is within the commercial designation, and the proposed general commercial C1 zone is enabled within the commercial designation. The subject property is also less than 5 acres and is adjacent to commercial designation. Council shall consider in relation to all applications to rezone the applicable zone placement policies, including any specific policy criteria for applying the proposed zones set out within this strategy, the impact of both the specific development proposal and other possible uses permitted in this proposed zone. The proposed rezoning is consistent with the zone intent and placement, which will be reviewed later. The impact of the proposed commercial zoning is considered compatible with the surrounding commercial zoning. The other permitted uses would also be appropriate in this location, where general commercial C1 zoning is located on the opposite side of Central Avenue, which is considered a main transportation route. So the subject property is within the commercial designation, and the proposed general commercial zone is enabled within this designation. The commercial designation's goal is to identify lands where commercial activities are promoted and prioritized over other lands. The economic development component of the commercial designation, is to develop and expand commercial, retail, and service uses, and to promote and encourage entrepreneurship and innovation. The proposed rezoning is consistent with promoting commercial activities and promotes and encourages entrepreneurship within the community. So the proposed rezoning is consistent with the zone placement the intent and placement. The impact of the proposed commercial rezoning is considered compatible with the surrounding commercial zoning. The general commercial policy 3.2.1 designate as commercial lands located within growth centers where commercial uses are encouraged and prioritized over other land uses. So the placement of zones within a designation is intended to control the location of different land uses. So the zone placements reflect the policy intent for each zone and the development pattern of communities at the time the zones were applied. The general commercial policy continued 3.2.2 establish the following commercial zones in the land use bylaw. A, general commercial C1 lands located in this zone are intended to accommodate a very wide range of commercial uses, as well as limited residential opportunities and low-impact industrial developments along main transportation corridors. This site falls within the Greenwood Secondary Plan, and the policies within the Greenwood Secondary Plan pertain primarily to water supply management and transportation, so there were no policies in this section relevant to this application. There was no public information meeting held because the property is less than 1 acre. 16 properties were within 500 feet were notified, but we have received no comments for the public at this time. So staff are recommending a positive recommendation for this application. And the recommendation would be that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone 1070 Central Ave in Greenwood from the mixed commercial residential C3 zone, the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone, and the residential multi-unit R3 zone to the general commercial C1 zone, as described in Appendix D of the report dated December 13th, 2022. And this is what the zoning would look like if this was approved.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of clarification for Ms. Ullman? Nothing? So Ms. Ullman read out the recommendation. It's on the screen before you. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Allen? Councillor Killam? Thank you. Is there any debate? No? I'll call the question. You can register your vote as soon as our lights come on. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Ullman. Well done. The only other item that we have on our agenda today is the naming of the PAC representative for the Lake Monitoring Steering Committee. And as was pointed out at the beginning of the meeting, we are working on a skeleton crew today. We have actually 3 members of our committee who are out. So if the committee doesn't have a problem with it, we'd like to move this to the January meeting, when hopefully we will have a full complement and we can be better prepared to fill that spot. Is that okay? No one has any problem with that? Councillor Windsor?
I'm okay with that. I was just
You
on
want
to other
your
business.
Other business,
Okay.
okay. Just a sec. Okay, so we will move that to our January meeting. And other business, Councillor Windsor, you go right ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I attended the Village Commission meeting last night for New Minas, and I was asked to follow up with on the New Minas secondary planning strategy. It was, I think, October meeting that we recommended that forward to council, and I've had several inquiries directly by email on it, but last night in the Village Commission, they particularly asked me to follow up and to let them know that they're concerned that it seems to have slowed down or come to some stop. I did convey to them earlier by email that it was with the CAO. That was as much as I could, that was as much as I had from the CAO. So I just wanted to convey that, and I don't know if staff has any update or when it can be expected, but they're obviously eager to see this carry on, because even when it gets approved, there's a long road ahead to see things happening. But they feel they're really missing out on development in the village. Month over month, the development statistics, permit statistics, has been lowest now for some time for New Minas, and it is because there's not a lot of available green space, undeveloped space for them to develop. So they're concerned in that regard. So I don't know if staff has anything to add, but I was asked to express these sentiments back into the county. Yep. And I will to the CAO directly as well.
We'll allow staff to answer that. Just one moment.
Through you, Madam Chair. Really, I have nothing additional to add. It remains with the CAO, and it is staff's hope to move that on as quickly as we can.
Thank you. Is there any other business to bring forward? No? Okay. So we have no public with us. And our next meeting is scheduled for January 10, 2023 at 1 p.m. in these chambers. And so I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Allen, Ms. Briers, thank you. If you register your vote on that, I can't imagine it won't be anything but unanimous, but there we go. We are adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful holiday season. I know some of these faces I'll see again before the holidays, but Ms. Friars I will not. So you have a wonderful holiday. Thank you all.